welcome to Stillspeakpod. So this week is apparently a Murdaugh week. The reason for that is because we're approaching Christmas, and when I do the other stories, at least ones we haven't discussed yet, that involves research and time, and right now I just don't have time for that. We will definitely continue doing missing persons stories and continuing the other cases that we're covering and add more, but the next 8 to 10 days is going to be pretty wild for me, so we got to see how that unfolds. And it's just easier to cover Murdaugh because I know the great majority of the story in my brain, and it doesn't require anything beyond just looking up updates and then thinking about what I want to say about these updates, and I could just hop on here, run my mouth, and call it a night. And today, I cleaned my garage. And I did that because Christmas is coming and I'm decluttering and getting rid of old stuff to make room for new stuff. And I'm noticing there's a sound difference because the garage is where I record, and because I decluttered and organized, I have this big open space now. And it's like when you're in an empty room, although there's a ton of stuff in here still, there's definitely a difference in the sound. So I don't know if you can tell, but I can definitely tell. So I apologize for that. In addition to that, if you heard my last video, at the very end, I was talking about how I needed to go find a hiding spot for my kids' gifts. And then I was having a hard time figuring out where to put it. If you're wondering, I found a spot. So, ooh. So I thought that I was going to be coming back in this video to discuss when Gloria Satterfield fell and they made a 911 call. But then a few things happened as far as updates in the Murdaugh story, and so I wanted to talk about those updates in this video instead, and then the next one will actually talk about that 911 call. So I told you on Sunday night that yesterday, Monday, was going to be a hearing for Alex, and that had been rescheduled from the prior week, and that one had gotten canceled because the 21 new grand jury indictments had come out. And I want to note here that you have to remember, now these are all felonies. However, he was arrested twice. First one was having to do with the shooting. He had 3 charges. Then he was in rehab. As soon as he was coming out of rehab, they arrested him in Orlando for the Satterfield sons. Not for them, but for what happened with them. So he had a total of 5 felony charges, and he's been in jail ever since that second arrest. And then the grand jury thing happened, which was the first batch of charges, which was 27. And then the second batch happened, which was 21. And he was denied bond based upon the original charges, not the grand jury charges. And I say that because today's hearing was a bond hearing for the grand jury indictments and charges, which were now at 48. And speaking of which, I read an article today and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that, so I need to correct something. The other day, I said that it was 48 grand jury charges, and then it was the 5 felonies between 2 arrests, bringing it to 53. It's not 53. It's 51. Here's the part that I actually forgot about until I saw it in an article, and I was like, oh my gosh. And that is that the 2 charges that happened after his second arrest actually went away because they were included in the 27 charges from the grand jury. So really, it's 51 charges. I know. Big difference, right? 53, 51. Does it really freaking matter at this point? No. But for the sake of being factual and making sure we have the accurate numbers, I wanted to say that. So I'm going to read to you parts of what Alex Murdaugh had told a judge yesterday. And apparently there was this 8-minute long speech, but there was no cameras allowed, and so we've only gotten parts of it. I'm sure we'll get more as time goes on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read parts, and then I'm going to make statements about what he was saying. Quote, I understand there may be concern. I may be a danger to myself. I made a terrible decision that I regret, and frankly, I'm embarrassed about. I'm not in that place now, unquote. All right, so he says, I understand there may be concern. I may be a danger to myself. Alex, I hate to break this to you, but they're not worried about you being a danger to yourself. They're worried about you being a danger to others because you've made many victims and now you're in a very desperate situation. And desperation causes extreme measures. They have no way of knowing if you will go out and harm any of your victims for speaking out against you. Okay? Just letting you know, okay? And in addition to that, you are most certainly a flight risk, without a doubt. And I would say that they're not worried about you being a danger to yourself, but they definitely don't want you to off yourself because they want to bring you to justice. And I'm not just talking about the judge. I'm talking about all the lawyers of all the victims and the victims. So, on behalf of the victims, the lawyers are fighting to keep your ass in jail where you belong. He allegedly, explained the day of the failed shooting, and he had revealed to his brother and former law partner that he had a 20-year opiate addiction, and he was in, quote, the throes of withdrawal, unquote. What? Huh? Wait a minute. So, is he trying to say that the day of the shooting that he was already in withdrawals? What? Come again? What's happening here? That's just confusing because he did come back positive for drugs in his system, but it was 24 hours later after the shooting, and so there's been some discussion that whatever they gave him in the hospital is why it came up positive, because there's a lot of people who doubt that he had an opiate addiction. I'm one of them. I think that even if he did, it was not 20 years. It was only for the last few years, but I don't totally believe he even had one, but who am I to say? I have no idea. That's just my personal opinion. But let me continue for a moment, and then I want to go back to this withdrawal statement, okay? Alex, started talking about the grief he felt after Maggie and Paul were killed, and then he said, quote, things were moving really quickly and really negatively. My world was caving in, unquote. This is really interesting. Things were moving really quickly. Okay. What was moving really quickly? I'll tell you what was moving really quickly. The day prior to your shooting, you were forced to resign because your law firm had caught on to what you had been doing. That's what was moving really quickly. Because prior to them making you resign, nothing was happening really quickly in your life, Alex. Your wife and son were killed in June, and we didn't know anything about you other than you were a part of this prominent family, and your son was in this boating accident, and you had a housekeeper who died. So what was moving really quickly? And what did you need to escape if you definitely did this shooting with the intent of dying that day? Which then brings me back to this withdrawal statement, implying that at the time that he did this whole scam and the shooting and all that he was in withdrawal. Okay, bro. I don't buy that. I don't buy that you had an opiate addiction for 20 years. Your wife and son die or are murdered. And then your law firm, or the one you worked at that your grandfather started freaking 100 years ago, comes to you and makes you resign from that law firm. And that's the period of time you decide to stop being an opiate addict. So yeah, no, sorry, I'm not buying it. And what world was caving in? What world was caving in? These words are very key here. When you lose somebody, typically your world is shattered, right? Especially if they're murdered and it's completely unexpected. I lost a friend a year and a half ago, same age as me. I was friends with her for almost 30 years, and she had a very bad form of cancer, and we all knew she was going to pass away for about a year, right? And so you semi-prepare for it, even though the loss is still terrible. You still grieve, but we were expecting it. There was no shock. There was no being stunned or anything like that. Like if somebody dies in a car accident, like you see them, they pull out of the driveway, and 10 minutes later they're dead. That's shocking. That's devastating. That's shattering. So when you have somebody who's murdered, you obviously have no idea, or you're not supposed to have an idea that that's going to happen. And so when it does happen, from the people that I've spoken to who have had family members murdered, it is shattering. There's nothing caving in. It's caved in already. I mean, you lost your wife and your son, and you only have one living son left. That's pretty shattering, in my opinion. You went from a family of 4 to a family of 2 in one night. And I get that the law firm found out what you were doing, right, and made you resign. But then not even 24 hours later, you're doing this scam. So what was moving really quickly, and what part of your world was caving in? If I have to throw my opinion in here, because I'd love to do that, I would say his world was caving in because he knew he was about to be exposed. He needed a way out. He needed to change the headline. He knew that the law firm was going to have to put out a statement. He knew his clients were going to find out about him having to resign, etc. So that's the part where his world was caving in. But you lost your son and your wife. So all you really cared about was the world that you built for yourself, which was scamming and robbing from people. And you didn't want that caving in on you, because now everybody was going to know what kind of person you really were. I'm just saying. So then he said he realized the severity of his actions and noted that the humiliation and embarrassment were crushing. Now almost 100 days opiate-free, Murdaugh says he wanted to apologize for his actions and accept responsibility. I want to deal with these charges appropriately and head on. I want to repair the damage I have done. I want to repeat as many relationships as I can. Huh? I want to repeat as many relationships as I can? I think that was a mistype in the paper. I think that's supposed to say repair. But okay. And again, it's about him because he talks about, he realized the severity of his actions and the humiliation and embarrassment were crushing. So it wasn't that, I feel bad for what I did to everybody. His initial statement is, well, I was so embarrassed and that was really crushing for me because I was so embarrassed. In my last video, I was talking about Alex's end game. Did he have an end game, or was he going to take this to the very end? And I mentioned the shooting. And I said, if he really did intend to die that day, which I don't totally believe that was the reason for what he did, but if he did, that means that right to the very end, he was going to go out robbing someone, being the insurance company, right? And what's really interesting about that is if he intended to die and do this one big last hurrah of scamming, he was going to leave this earth doing that, never having seen that $10 million. So then you have to wonder, is this about the money? Or was this about something more? Like just the power and control, the excitement, the thrill. Who knows? I don't know. But he wasn't even going to see that money because he was dead. Or he would have been dead. But he still wanted to get in that one last scam. But then I thought today, when reviewing this and thinking about the shooting, what's really interesting to me? And again, this goes back to talking to families of murdered loved ones. From what they say, one of the biggest motivators to keep them going when they're dealing with heading to a trial is this anticipation, if you will, to see who the killer is, if you don't know, and then see them brought to justice. And if Alex really intended to die that day, and he had died that day, he would have left the earth never knowing who killed his wife and son or see them be brought to justice. That's fascinating. Unless, of course, he knows who killed them already. Then he wouldn't need to stick around to know that. So, why? Why wouldn't you stick around for your wife and son to make sure that they get the justice and that they're remembered and keep their, memory alive and be there for Buster? Listen, I know that when somebody decides to end their life, they're not of sound mind, and I get it, okay? And that could be at play here. It's just really hard for me to believe when it comes to Alex Murdaugh. But I don't want to completely dismiss that maybe he really was in a really bad place. Maybe he was. It's possible. And it's possible whether he's involved or not involved in their deaths. If he was feeling some type of guilt for being involved, it could have been connected to wanting to just end his life. But when it comes to Alex, I don't know. He's just a different kind of person, okay? Clearly. And so that's just a random thought that I had today because I don't want to assume I know what I would do in the same situation because I'm a big believer that we can never know what we would do unless we experience it. You can't answer a question or say something like, I would never, because you don't know that. You don't know. If you never experienced it, you have no freaking clue if you would or you wouldn't. And I hate in true crime groups when somebody's like, if it was my son, I would never do this. Let's just say in the Brian Laundrie case. If it was my son, I would never, hire him a lawyer. I would make him pay the consequences, blah, 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 blah. And it drives me nuts because you don't know that. It's so easy to sit back and say, I would never. Especially if you never experienced it. You have no idea. And so it just drives me crazy. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, if my husband and son were killed, that I would not kill myself because I would want to stick around to find somebody who did it and see who it was and get them justice because I have no freaking idea. I think it would kill me if something happened to my husband and my son on the same day. I mean, that would be just, that dinging is annoying. It would be, absolutely upsetting, and I don't even know if I can continue living, and I would think, I don't know for sure, that my other children would be the driving force to want to stick around. But I don't know that, right? And I don't want to assume. Anyway, getting back to the hearing. So this judge set a $7 million bond. And he's required to be monitored with GPS, remain under house arrest, surrender his passport, and waive extradition if he leaves the state. And he also needs substance abuse counseling and random drug testing at a residential facility within the state. And they also took away the whole 10%. So he would be on the hook for the whole $7 million. Now that's important. But also what's important is that he had no bond for the other charges for which he was arrested for. So he's not going anywhere. Okay? And the dude no way has $7 million. Now, he may have $7 million, but that would require him basically selling everything he's ever owned, down to freaking shovel. His houses, his properties, his cars, everything. Even the forks in his house probably cost more than my entire cabinet full of plates and cups and stuff like that. That would need to be sold. The issue with that is they're still under a receivership where there are people in charge of all of his assets and money and can't sell off anything, okay? That ends on December 29th unless it's renewed, which it probably will be. They will probably fight for that to stay in place for now, therefore making it impossible for him to come up with this $7 million. And in addition to that is he can't sell off all these assets from jail. Okay, he can't put a house on the market and his cars and all that, so he would need to rely on somebody on the outside to do it for him to get the $7 million to get him out of jail. And at this point, I don't know that Alex has many people who are still on his side. I mean, remember Randy Murdaugh, he just filed a lawsuit against him about the money he borrowed from him. I'm not even sure if Buster is supporting his father. We have no idea. I haven't heard about him being at the hearings or anything like that. We haven't really seen him. Good for him for staying in hiding, but we don't even know if he is supporting or standing behind his father. So then something else came out yesterday that's also rather fascinating, and that is involving Curtis Edward Smith. Wow, this guy. Kids knocked on the door. So When we first heard about Curtis Edward Smith after the shooting, I was like, what is up with this guy? This is such a random person. Like, where did he come into play into all of this? At that time, I didn't think that we were going to be actually discussing him much at all. And he's actually become a very big part in the story, like crazy big part. Well, when we talked, not last video, but the video prior to that, we discussed that not only had Alex given him $160,000, but we also found out that he had given him 254 personal checks, and then the total came to $1.8 million. It was actually a little bit over that. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was roughly $1.8 million that Alex had given to Curtis Edward Smith. Well, the lawyers for the Satterfield sons came out in court and said that they actually have now discovered that it's $2.8 million freaking dollars in 2 years' time that Alex gave Curtis Edward Smith. Woo! And I must remind you that the last one that he gave to Curtis was only 10 days before the deaths of Maggie and Paul. So here's another $1 million question in the story. Why 10 days before the deaths of Maggie and Paul? It's easy for our brains to go, oh God, that looks really bad, right? You know, that's where your mind immediately goes. And then you have to wonder, why not any money in June? Why not any money in July? Didn't he give him money in August? For whatever reason he was giving him money to begin with. And then you allegedly hired him to take you out in a desperate moment that you claim to be having. And there doesn't seem to be any proof that you gave him money for that particular event. So for 2 years, through 254 checks and 17 cashier checks, you're dishing out $2.8 million to Curtis Edward Smith, and you do it all the way up to almost, less than 2 weeks prior to the deaths of your son and wife. Then you stop for 3 months, and then you hit this dude up to kill you. Why didn't you pay him more money then? Now, I want to go way back here for a moment to a video that I did where we were talking about Curtis Edward Smith. I don't remember what freaking video it was. I remember saying it, so this is why I'm bringing it up. But in that, I said, it's a little odd to me that Alex just happened to know somebody that he could ask that person to kill him. I mean, if a friend came to me and said, I want you to kill me, I would be like, you're out of your freaking mind. There's no way in hell. That wouldn't even be like a 5-second thought. It wouldn't even be a 10-second thought. It would be nothing. It'd be a hell no. I ain't going to jail to kill you. There's no way. And so, especially if a friend called me and I showed up to where they told me to come, and they got out and they had a gun and they were like, oh, shoot me in the back of the head, I'd tell them to go F themselves. There's no way I'm doing that. And I remember saying at one point in that video, I said, how did Alex know to call this Curtis guy? Why him? What about Curtis made Alex think that when Curtis got there, that Curtis would just be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, no problem, give me the gun, boom. How did he know that? Serious, this is a serious question. Unless he knows that Curtis has killed before. Just throwing it out there. If you called up a random friend and you needed, let me rephrase that. If you wanted to do what Alex was going to do, and you had to go through your list of friends and consider which one would show up and agree to kill you, would you be able to come up with somebody? Most likely not, right? Is there anybody on your friends list who would immediately come to your mind to be like, you know what, I think that guy, he definitely would do it for me. I'm going to call him from wherever. I'm going to tell him to come there. When he comes there, I'm going to tell him to kill me, and he'll probably do it. Do you? I sure as hell hope not. None of us should know somebody who'd be willing to do that. And if you do, unfriend them. You don't want that person in your life, okay? So it's fascinating to me that there was money exchange not only prior to the deaths of Maggie and Paul, just 10 days, but over 2 years, and that so far there's no evidence of money being exchanged right before this happened in September, and that Alex just knew the exact person to call, and he was so sure that this guy was going to show up and just be like, yeah, sure, no problem, bro, I'll shoot you, and freaking kill him. And so that leads me to believe that either Alex thought that he was capable of doing something like that, or he knew that he had done it before. What also stands out to me about no proof thus far of Alex paying him to do this botched suicide thing is that obviously if this was all legit, like he really did want to die that day and he intended on dying that day, then how is Curtis going to get the money from him for killing him if he's dead? Right? From the grave, he can't pay him. So he would have needed to pay him prior to him being killed. Meaning pay Curtis prior to being dead. Unless someone on the outside, and that would be Buster, which I just don't believe, would have needed to be in on it to know to give Curtis a portion of that insurance money. I just don't believe that Buster would have gone along with his father dying after losing his mother and brother, but I don't know him, so I don't know. I personally don't believe that, but what I'm saying is there had to be some sort of exchange of money for him to do this or agree to it, if indeed he did agree to it and it just went all wrong once they got into that situation. Or was it more like, I already paid you $2.8 million over the last 2 years, do I really need to give you more money? It could have been that as well. But again, I go back to, how did he know to call him? And why was he so sure to call him there and know that he would go along with this? I'm not accusing. This is all in my opinion, Curtis. Okay? But Curtis is an interesting person. Let's just say that. And I think he's got a lot of involvement here. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Curtis Edward Smith and many of his dirty secrets. In my last video, I talked about who taught Alex to do this, or was it that he got an idea one day, he executed the idea, and it was successful, and then he just decided from that point, like, oh, well, that worked, let me keep going. And then it worked again, and he just kept going. I felt like somebody taught him this. I just don't think that he came up with this on his own. It could be, but I just don't believe that. And so now I go to Curtis Edward Smith, who clearly has a history And I have to wonder if he introduced Alex or planted into Alex's head to do what Alex started to do. And the reason I say that is because, unfortunately, in my life, at one point or another, I've known people who've, had criminal histories. And what I've always noticed about these people is that they're criminal-minded. What do I mean by that? Meaning they're always looking to do the next thing. Doesn't matter how many times they've been caught doing crimes. They're always they look at each situation and think, okay, what can I do with this situation to get something out of it? How can I make this benefit me? They're always looking for that next crime. I don't know how else to explain that. And I'm not talking major crimes. I'm talking about more minor type of crimes. They just don't look at situations the same way as we do. They look at a broken washer and they think oh, I'm going to clean it and make it look brand new, and then I'm going to sell it and try to make, X amount of money when the thing doesn't even run. They're always just looking for the next thing that can benefit them in some way, and scam and scheme and rob and do whatever else to other people. And prior to this, Alex had no criminal history. Now, just because you don't have a criminal history doesn't mean that you hadn't been doing crimes for longer than we think, because that just means that you weren't caught, right? You can't have a history if you're not caught. Well, now Alex is definitely caught, so now he does have a history. So it could be that he had a criminal past, he just never was caught for it. And now it's just all catching up to him and snowballing. Do you see what I'm saying? So you look at Curtis and you're like, this guy, he's the type of guy who's had a criminal past. And so did he give Alex this idea? And Alex just ran with it. And then maybe Alex was sharing portions of the money he was taking as kind of a thanks for giving me this idea, hence the $2.8 million. And that's just what we know about so far, right? Originally, we heard $160,000, and then it went up to $1.8 million. Now we're hearing it's really $2.8 million. Next thing we know is going to be oh, now the total's $7 million. We actually don't know the full total of what he gave to Curtis Edwards Smith yet. The next interesting thing is that Alex, has now agreed to confess and issue an apology to the Satterfield sons for the financial transgressions committed in connection with the wrongful death settlement funds recovered in connection with the death of Gloria Satterfield and the pain it has caused. And this was yesterday that he agreed to confess to a judgment of $4.3 million to her family. Now, we talked about the amount of money that the sons have gotten. I think it's $7 or $8 million now. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but they're making out with almost double what the original settlement was. Actually, almost triple, because the original was 4.3, then there was attorney fees, so then it came out to 2 point something, but now they're up to $7 or $8 million. So they're definitely making up for what they've been through, for sure. And originally, Alex's lawyers were we want this lawsuit and charges dropped because they have already made back money from other people, basically, that Alex shouldn't have to also pay them back kind of situation. But now, during this hearing, trying to get him bond, he's agreeing to confess to the judgment of $4.3 million. And this sounds like a power play by his lawyers to kind of be like, listen, Alex, in order for you to get some kind of bond here, you're going to have to take some ownership. You know what I'm saying? Like, make it seem like you're a changed person. Okay? So we're going to, like, tell them that you agreed to confessing. But, like, they're never going to see that money anyways. But you got to do it, if you want to get out. That's what it sounds like to me. A power play of sorts. Because he did it on the same day. So why would you agree to the 4.3 when you're getting bonds set at $7 million and you can't just put up 10%? Because now that brings it to $11.3 million. And I'm sorry, I don't think Alex Murdaugh has $11.3 million. I don't think he has it. And let's face it, this dude is selfish as all hell, all right? So let's say the people in charge of all his assets right now, let's say that doesn't get renewed at the end of the month, and he's allowed access back to everything. And even if he sells everything, who do you think he's going to pay first? Who? Is he going to pay to get himself out of prison? Jail? Or is he going to give it to them? I'm going with he's going to save his own ass first, right? Yeah, he definitely is. And that is if the no bond on the original charges then gets reviewed and there's a bond there as well, which would be in addition to the $7 million. South Carolina, I have friends who live there. From my understanding, the cost of living there is not high. Well, it may be now, because everything's high right now. But from my understanding, we're not talking New York City prices. We're not talking LA. We're not talking, Minnesota. I don't know how much his properties are worth. I have no idea. And, but they could be a decent amount of money, especially the Moselle property, since it is 1,700 acres. And the cars, but from what I remember, the cars are registered to the law firm, so he might not even have any ownership to those cars, and they may have been leases, so there's that. And then you take all the other assets, like any type of country club fees and hunting club fees and everything else that I mentioned before that's in their home. Can he come up with $7 million plus $4.3 million plus whatever the other bond would be and then still have any type of money left over? I don't know. That's a lot of freaking money. I'm talking like $15 million. I don't think he has $15 million unless he has money, offshore. But this money thing made me think of Monopoly. When you read these articles about this case and involving all the money, so many numbers are thrown around, right? Just these big, massive numbers. $100,000, $500,000, $1.2 million, $4.3 million, $7 million. It's like all of these people are just throwing around Monopoly money. Like, what? Can someone out there give me a financial breakdown here? Because all these numbers, it's just mind-boggling to me. This is real money, people. Real money. Like, he's being charged with 48 charges through the grand jury involving stealing thousands and thousands and thousands and millions of dollars from people. And then you set the bond at $7 million. Like he somehow magically has this $7 million. And sometimes judges do that. Who's in jail right now? Lori Vallow. She was the doomsday mom. She's crazy. That's a whole nother story for another day. That story is, talk about confusing and hard to follow. Woo! That one. You need 10 whiteboards for that one. But with Lori Vallow, they had set her bond at $1 million or $2 million or something like that. And somebody was like, why would they do that? It was crazy high. And the 10% was waived. And they do that because they know the person cannot post that bail. So they're like, oh, sure, we'll get bond, but we're going to put it so high that you can't freaking afford it. But think about the victim. So you look at the story and you're like, well, this dude's in jail for taking all this freaking money from people. He wants to get out of jail. You set his bond at $7 million. Really, his victims deserved their money back. So he should be forced to have to pay them back before he can actually post bond. Because I think his history shows that he's going to think about himself before he thinks of his victims. So if he ends up posting that $7 million, how much money is there going to be even left for him to give to anybody else? Or we're just going to settle all of these civil suits out of court, because I'm sure more civil suits are coming involving these victims, and it won't just be through the prosecutors. I don't know. I'm just saying. I think it's, I don't know. Our court system is weird in some ways. So they make things a little bit more complex than they need to be. I think it should be just a little easier, less jargon and nonsense and BS. And there's certain protocols and ways that they do things that just don't make a whole lot of sense to me. And not because I'm not a lawyer, just because it's like, why do that when you can do this? Like, some of the things that get judgments on are just, I don't know. Anyway. So, yeah. So, why would you do that? So he's going to pick himself. He's not going to really pay the Satterfield sons $4.3 million. It's not happening. I'm sorry. I'm going to be blunt. And I'm going to say it like a fact when I don't even know if it's a fact. But let's be real. He's not paying them $4.3 million if he's got to choose between himself and them, period. And the last thing I wanted to say tonight is that, people say that he's the only person of interest in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. And I want to say that that is actually not factually true. Just because SLED has not named another person of interest or suspect does not mean there is not one. Everybody operates differently across agencies and states, etc. And sometimes they will name a person of interest. Sometimes they don't. They feel that if they publicly come out and name a person of interest, that will make that person go quiet. And if they're trying to get that person to talk, that's not the way you want to do it. And they hold their cards close to the vest. And in some cases they do. And actually, SLED is not the ones who named Alex a person of interest, at least not that I've seen. How we actually found out that Alex was a person of interest in the deaths of Maggie and Paul was from his own freaking lawyer, who admitted that he is. Okay? So, again, I think that Alex has involvement in the deaths, directly or indirectly. However, there could be another person of interest or another suspect or someone he did it with. We just don't know that. And just because they haven't said that doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm just throwing that out there. A lot of people think that two different guns were used to make it seem like it was two different people. And I've always kind of agreed with that, because I think that the idea that someone who's not Alex out there in the world wanted Paul and Maggie dead as much as a second person wanted Paul and Maggie dead. That would mean two different people with strong enough motive to want these two individuals dead. And from an outside source of the family, okay? And I just felt that was just not believable. I just found that really hard to believe. So I was kind of like, yeah, you know what? That actually makes sense. Kill one, kill the other with the other gun, make it seem like it was two people, and they're coming for you and they're out for you. But with all my thoughts about Curtis Edward Smith and now all this money and how deep was this relationship between Curtis and Alex, etc., I started thinking about the guns. And I know that one was taken into evidence, but there was one still missing. And what's interesting to me about that is that the gun used in Alex's shooting on the side of the road is also missing. And Curtis has refused to go and get this gun and turn it in. And we have no idea what he did with it. And there's been 2 versions of what happened from Alex. There's been 2 different versions from Curtis of what happened. So we have 4 versions of the story, okay? And in all 4 of the stories, it ended with, well, I panicked and I took the gun and I disposed of it. That's the only thing in all 4 versions that was the same, was that Curtis took this gun and disposed of it. And to this day, I have yet to see a single reporter ask him in an interview, where is the gun? Why won't you go get it? Why won't you turn it in? Why won't you tell them where it is? Etc. And it could be that he was advised to not discuss the gun. And sometimes when you are using a lawyer, when you're doing media interviews, they will tell the person who's conducting the interview not to ask specific questions. I have to believe that's the case, because it's hard for me to believe there's not a single reporter out there who's not curious about why he's not willing to help them locate this gun. But think about the similarity here, okay? Think about the fact that there was a gun also taken, that's out there somewhere, from the deaths of Maggie and Paul. And I know you know what my opinion is. My opinion is that Alex is involved. I don't know yet if he's directly or indirectly. What do I mean by that? Did he actually do the shooting himself? Possibly. Did he have somebody else do it? Possibly. Did he do it with someone? Possibly. So there's several theories that I think that are plausible, even though my one opinion is that he's involved. Let's say that him and Curtis actually did the shooting. Allegedly, maybe, in my opinion, possibly. Okay? Let's just say that. And hence the 2 different guns. And maybe it really was 2 people. And one person was there when help arrived. And so was one gun. That would mean that Curtis left and took that gun, which is a pattern because it matches up to taking the gun, fleeing the scene in the second event in September. But wait a minute, you just said that you don't think that there's 2 people out there who would have both the same motive and drive to want Paul and Maggie dead. I did say that. However, Alex, well, the motive is rather clear to me, and there are several different motives that I think fit him, and I went over those. But with Curtis, there's a money motive. Maybe he thought that Alex would stop supplying him money if he didn't do what he wanted him to do. And he wanted that money to keep flowing in. Money is a big motivator. But when you're looking at it as outside sources with an axe to grind who both wanted these 2 individuals dead, I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch. Because what do they get out of Paul and Maggie being dead? If we're talking outside source, outside person. What do they get out of it? 2 dead people? A possibility of going to jail for the rest of their life? Or the death penalty? What do they get out of it? A couple of years ago, my husband and I were having a conversation, and I made this random statement. We were just talking about people in general. And I said, I think we were talking about work, and we were talking about people. And I said, everybody has an agenda. Everybody has an agenda for what they do. There's always an agenda. Which agenda? Motive. Everybody has a motive for what they do. And it kind of reminds me of the Friends episode. I don't know how many of you like the show Friends. I'm a huge fan. And there's an episode with Phoebe and Joey. They're two characters in the show. And the argument was that there is no selfless good deed. That even when you do a good deed, you feel good, which is motive. Right? You get something out of it because you feel good for doing it. And when we do things, we basically, in a way, think of our motive for doing it. I'm going to go to the store at 3 o'clock because if I go at 5 o'clock, then there's going to be tons of traffic. So what's motivating me to go to the store at 3 o'clock is that there'll be traffic at 5 o'clock. I'm just giving you a dumb example, but it was a statement I made to him that's kind of stuck around, and it's something like we bring up anytime we're talking about people, ourselves included, and I'll be like, everybody has an agenda. Everybody has an agenda. I have this YouTube channel, right? I have an agenda. I have a motive. What is my motive? My motive is to come on here and talk and spread people's stories and talk about cases. I talk about cases because I enjoy talking about cases. I spread people's faces because it makes me feel good, going back to the Friends episode, to help people because I genuinely care. Those are all motives. Motive to kill somebody is a whole other level though, right? Because you're choosing to end somebody's life. So it's got to be a pretty decent motive. Now, are there senseless, ridiculous murders? Absolutely. There was a case recently, I think it was in Florida, of a 14-year-old boy. He went out on a bike ride, and a homeless man, just in a random act, stabbed this 14-year-old boy to death and left his body on the side of the road. From what we've been told so far, it doesn't seem there was much motive other than just a random crime. Maybe the person suffered from mental illness or something like that. But see, that mental illness explains why he did this. Now, does everybody with mental illness go around and kill people? No. But whatever this person was suffering from did make him do that. So you can say the mental illness was the motivation or what pushed him to do this crime. And I'm definitely not shaming mental illness. I understand that not everybody who has mental illness is going to kill somebody. Trust me, I know. So your motive to kill somebody typically has to be pretty up there, okay? It has to be a pretty decent motive for you to actually do something so horrific. And to kill a mother and son, a 22-year-old and his mother on their own property, that takes some pretty deep motive, in my opinion. And it also feels very personal, and I said that already. I said it in another video. From what we've been told, or how I'm understanding it, is that Paul was killed first and with a shotgun at point blank range. And it appeared that Maggie was trying to run away and was shot from behind. No matter which way you look at it, one witnessed the other being killed and then killed themselves. And it's one thing to be killed. It's another thing to have to watch somebody you love be killed and then you be next. So it feels very personal, because that's a terrible way to die. And if it was Paul that was killed first, imagine Maggie as a mother. Imagine that, just for a second. I know we kind of joke around and talk about this case in a more lighthearted kind of way, but at the root of this, if that's true, Maggie witnessed her son being killed right in front of her before she lost her own life. On a property where they spent many, many days as a family, laughing and hunting and parties and what looks to be galas, etc., where you had all these memories and time as a family, and you're shot dead after witnessing your son being killed on that property. That's some evil shit. I'm just being real here. So really, who has that type of motive to do something so, oh my God, horrible, 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 horrible? Hopefully we'll find out soon. I know, they're still investigating. These things take time. We have to wait. We have to see, etc. And in the meantime, the story continues, as I always say, and we will see here in the next couple of weeks if Alex will have access back to his assets and if he will be able to post that $7 million bond and or the $4.3 million to the Satterfield sons. I also saw in an article today that someone went and looked up at all of his charges and like what the max sentence was for each one, including the first three. And the other day I said that it was over 100 years. Apparently that was involving the 27 charges. With all 51 charges, he's looking at more than 500 years in prison, which is impossible. So yeah, if he's convicted of all of those, he's absolutely screwed. And I don't think this is over. I think the grand jury will, reconvene next month, and we'll probably hear of a whole nother batch of charges. I don't know. So you know where I stand as far as my opinion, and I know there's a lot of varying opinions about what happened to Maggie and Paul. I'd be really interested in where some of you stand. Do you think at this point, because I've asked this before, but now we have even more information, so every few videos I'm going to ask you again. So put it in the comments. Do you think that Alex is directly or indirectly involved in the deaths of his wife and son? Or do you think it was an outside person connected to something else? I had to pause because there was a train. Okay, so I live like 1.5 miles, 2 miles from a train track. But when the train goes by, it is so loud. It sounds like it's behind my house. It's not all day. It's not every day. It's like once a week. But it's so weird. It's the sound travels so far. I'm sure that sounded like it was outside my front door, and it's not. So yeah, go ahead and tell me in the comments. I'm just kind of curious where everybody stands at this point. So thanks for listening to me ramble. And now the next video, we will definitely go over the Satterfield 911 call. And until next time, I'm out. I gotta go wrap some presents and call it a night. I'll see you soon.